So in the continuation of this particular uh, the codes and standard, let us review uh, the last lecture's point, that is the code and standards. So as we discussed about this earlier as well, what is the code? So it's just so I'm just in the forward motion I'm telling you this about again. So it's just a set of rule or any subjects that is supported by the force of the law by one or more governmental judiciary, and that is you can say the is the mandatory contract or agreement that needs to apply when to perform a kind of a fabrication or another kind of work. So as we talked about, this code is usually an elaborated document that is in some cases may run into thousands of pages, and again the costing uh, the person, uh, that is the biggest example we discussed, that is the ASME boiler and pressure vessel code. So these are the codes, but that is following by the various associations like Canadian and British and American welding societies. So now we talked about code. Now we going to the standards. So what is the standard? Again, it is a kind of document that is specifying nationally or internationally agreed properties, that why these properties, it is for manufactured goods or standardized procedure for doing a job or a method of carrying out a test, etc. So such kind of a standard basically deal with the single item of the reference, and that include the welding electrodes, equipments, their methods, their techniques, and this standard is also following by the government bodies or the agencies, like in India, if we are talking about this standard, that is governed by the BIS, that is Bureau of Indian Standards, or by nationally recognized agency association. For example, in another countries, the UK is going for the BSA, that is the British Standard Association, and however in USA there is a large number of organizations that we were talked about and we will discuss later on in this lecture. And moving further, that the specification that is we are highlighting over in this slide, that the specification, the recommended practices, guide and certifications, why it is required. So these documents, which are very similar to standard, are offered primarily as aid to the users and become mandatory only when they are referred by code or contractual documents. And sometimes there is hardly any difference in the presentation of the standard, that is specification, recommended practices, guide or certification, except that they have been issued by different agencies, with each having kind of you can say the preferences for the use of these specific items. So in this case, the minimum requirement of a particular code or standard that do not satisfy the need of a user, तो और जो ये बातें हैं, then the a particular user maybe find that it is necessary to invoke additional requirement to obtain desired quality of the product or the services. So these points to be taking care all the time, then we performing the kind of inspection or the process. So now moving towards this, the next document, that is legal time, that is the source of issuing agencies. So these agencies are nothing, just defined according to the national and internationally, as we discussed these points. So further moving towards the from the India, that having a BIS system, that is written over here, that the Bureau of Indian Standards and New Delhi develops and issues and updates. So basically we are discussing here how these standard are issuing the codes and standard for the various products, and these standard that apply to almost every area of interest, and that is the BIS. Bureau of Indian Standard has kind of a committees also, and that the having a kind of a task group as well to perform these functions. And what are the role of these particular members, that these basically these committee members is doing these committees are kind of a group of or a specialist in their field. The members, though, who are the participant of these task group, they need to perform these functions, and they are the specialists of their fields, and they prepare draft of code and standard that are reviewed and approved by a larger group. So they have this kind of responsibility to look after all these standards and codes, and then it is to be reviewed by the another kind of a larger group of expertise to finalize these standard to get a better product. So the review group is who is the review grouper, right? So the question arises. So they are nothing, just selected included person with having kind of interest, including the wider range of interest. And if we are talking about this interest area, so for example, if we need to understand that producer, users, and government representatives, these are the groups members who are finalizing these codes, and according to their requirement or the customer requirement or the conditions requirement. So what we need to control is to kind of avoiding the to control or undue influence by one interested group. एग्रीमेंट मस्ट बी रीच एट बाय द मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द मेंबर. ऐसा नहीं कि बस एक ग्रुप ने अपना बाई फोर्स या बाई बाई यू कैन से बाई फोर्स और बाई hook or crook, simply for their dictatorship, they apply these interest. But it is not acceptable till the large number of majority group is to be agreed for the particular work. So the mechanism for developing kind of a defense document like standards that are very much similar to those of the BIS, that is the Bureau of Indian Standards, that relating to this defense document as well. So these standard basically writing committees usually exist within a division kind of army, air force, and the navy, and that have the responsibility, that has a kind of a responsibility of a particular item or the services to be provided in the defense system. So most of the time these standard basically are based on the one issue by the supplier of the kind of a military hardware or their product supplier. So this standard is defined according to them, and then after all the industries, that is the advanced countries, having kind of a developed and issued the code and standard as well on the subject of the these welding and the NDT. So if we are talking about apart from this IAT Indian standard, that is issued by the Bureau of Indian Standard BIS, and following by the example of more widely used other national standard as well, designation as well, and these body responsible for issuing them according to the nationalities, These are the listed here. And first, that Indian standard, obviously, that is, then the BS, that is the British standard, that is issued by the British Standard Association, is called the BSA, that is not including here. And that the another is the CSA, that is Canadian standard, issued by the Canadian Standard Association. Then it is called the DIN is relating to the German standard, issued by the Dissociation Institute für Normung. And then EN is also Euro norms, issued by the European nation. And GIS, that is the JIS, Japanese Industrial Standard, issued by the Japanese Standard Association. So these are the things, the points which is related to the standard. And then the America, if we talk about the American, they created a lots of kind of codes and standard according to the division, according to the working areas. So they are the basically ASNT, AWS, ASME, API, boiler, and pressure vessel. uh, almost all of the area they covered for providing the code and standards. So we will discuss them one by one. That in the USA, both the private and the governmental organization develop an issue, then update the code and standard as well, that to be applied to their particular areas of interest. So these interest of a number of organization overlap with regard to the welding is evident. And having these agreement have been made to reduce duplication of the effort as well. So if we're talking about that are published by the American Bureau of Shipbuilding. However, ships are basically a structure, and therefore they are applicable by the ABS specification, that is the part of reference of AWSD 1.1, that is leading to the structural welding code steel for the qualification of the welding and the welding operator, issued by the AWS, American Building Society. So this is because most of the code and standard, those are concerned with welding and allied processes, and the inspection as well, are prepared by the American Welding Society. So because these subject basically interest of these NDT and the welding procedure, so these American Welding Society play a very vital role for defining these kind of a test and the process to perform these operations. So these another kind of standard also, institution also, that including the from the America, that is the ANSI, that is the American National Standard Institution. And we will talk about this in the next lecture, not in the next lecture, in the this next slide. And we can see this, we talk about this ASTM and ASNT. And now we will come back on this later on. I'm just showing the how much kind of these standard institution are aligned here. So these are the ASME, as we discussed, and then the API, then ANSI, that is a standard of institute, that is AWS, including all. And AIA, Aerospace Industry Association, that is NBBI, of boiler and pressure vessel inspector. And then the ISO system and the European nation. And this is the Indian standard, that is followed by the Bureau of Indian uh, Standard. These are the basic work experience training that to be provided for the welding, the NDT qualification. So now we were talking about this American National Standard Institute, that provide a kind of a responsibility for coordinating the national standard use, that is within the USA as well. So these ANSI, This does not actually prepare the standard that also ASMI. And this national standard is basically interest of reviewing the groups to determine the usefulness of proposed standard in the public interest, and each group comprises the person from the various organization that is to be concerned with the use of particular documents, and if there is a conscious regarding the usefulness of the particular standard, then it may be adopted as an ANS, that is American National Standard adoption of standard. Yes, so apart from this, basically this ANSI, this is also relating to the defense system as well, to military standard defense document to prepare for military services as well, and is also including the kind of material products and defense forces their requirements, and we were talked about this also, that is ISO. Then there is ISO is nothing just an international organization for standardization, which aim at establishment of global standard for achieving uniform standard in production and services to make the international trade smoother and less cumbersome. And these norms basically mostly based on the European norms, the British standard, ANSI standard, and these intendants to harmonious of all ISO and EN standard, but that stage is yet to be reached by these standard methods. And so we we came to this slide, and this slide basically showing us the kind of ASTM standards for the testing of NDT methods basically, and it helps to understand this system. So these are the basic kind of ASTM methods, that is including the code, and that code defining the particular testing methods that include in the WPS. So these are the ASTM E709 that basically leading with the magnetic particle standard guide for the magnetic particle testing, and then ASTM E1444, that is leading to the again the practice of the magnetic particle. So again the next one is the ASTM 165 E165, that is standard practice for the liquid penetrant examination for general industries, and further continuations that leading to another code, that is the ASTM E1417, standard practice for liquid penetration testing, and then ASTM E1208, standard practice for liquid penetration testing using the lipophilic post-emulsifying process. So when these codes are mentioned in the WPS, the person, the qualified inspector, will automatically known how to perform this kind of a test. And again, moving towards this ASTM E1209 standard practice for the liquid penetrant testing using the water washable process, and using a hydrophilic post emulsified process, that is including the E1210. And next is the ASTM E1219, that is standard practice for liquid penetration testing, that using the solvent removable process, practice for the ultrasonic pulse echo straight pin um, examination by the contrast method. And then ASTM E164, that is standard practice for the contact ultrasonic testing of the weldment. Then ASTM E21 ultrasonic testing for the metal pipe and turbine and tubing system. And then so these are the basic lots of kind of standards that are following regarding performing the various kind of NDT methods. So again, moving toward this ASTM E164, that is the practice for the contact ultrasonic testing of the weldment. And then moving toward the E213, that is standard for the practice of the ultrasonic testing of the metal pipe and the tubing. And then ASTM E2375 is relating to the ultrasonic testing of wrought product. And then come to the E94, that is guide for the radiography examination. It is very most important examinations, and that standard course including all the details that is to be performed during this particular test. So step by step procedures are provided here. And then moving further, ASTM E1742, that practice of for radiography examinations, that including the various kind of documentation, inspection, and much more than that. And then the further the ASTM E1000 guide for the radiography as well. And ASTM E1255, the practice for the radioscopy. So don't be confused what is the meaning of practice and the guide, as we discussed about these particular points, that a guide is a compendium of information or series of options that does not recommend a specific course of action. Guide increases the awareness of information and approach in a given subjected areas. The practice is a definitive set of instruction for performing one or more specific operations or function that does not produce test results. And this practice is basically nothing to perform the test result. So example is that the practice include but not limited to application, assessment, cleaning, collection, contamination, decontamination, installation, and so on. And the test method is a definitive procedure that produce test results. Example of test method include but are not limited to identification, measurement, and evaluation of one or more quality characteristics of the property. So these are the basic things that is including here in this course to perform these things. And then moving further, there are the various kind of a course. Again, the ASTM E1032, the test method for the radiography examination of the weldment and the casting in 1030 E1030. That moving toward the below the E999, that guiding for controlling the quality of industry radiography film processing. So in industry, the radiograph is very widely used for the precise detection of the defects. So this step-by-step guiding procedure is available in this article. And then ASTM radiography. So you can see there is a difference between the film and the computed radiography. And always there is ASTM standard, always that is the E142, that method for controlling quality of radiography testing. Then we are moving toward the ASTM 2738, is standard practice for the digital imaging and communication for the non-destructive evaluation, DICONDE, for computed radiography test method. and this ASTM E268 is the electromagnetic testing, and then the last one is the ASTM E426, that is practice for the electromagnetic eddy current examination of the seamless and the welded tubular product, austenitic stainless steel, similar alloys, and so on. So these basic standards of the ASTM, American Society for Testing Material, in the article 03.03, they providing a large number of these vast number of categorized standards to follow uh, for this test, and to provide a kind of good quality weld or a specimen of the product for this purpose. So this is for the lecture, and in the next lecture we will discuss more about the another uh, welding and NDT methods standards, which is following by the USA and other countries. So till now I am holding this lecture. Thank you.